this morning in our Victorious series. The question is, what do you want to be different in your life? What do you wish was different? What's the thing you've been praying would change? Because we all have those things. Throughout our lives, we'll always have things that need to be different. And that's because our lives are just one big journey, right? We know our life is a journey. Well, it's the same thing in our relationship with God. It's one big journey. And just like in life in general, in your relationship with God, there's going to be things that need to be different. Things that He'll tell you, hey, this needs to be different. When we have sin in our lives, He'll bring up times where He makes us aware that it needs to be different. He makes us aware of those bad habits that maybe keep holding you back from real spiritual growth with God. Could be addictions that you keep turning to. We all have those things in our lives that we just know need to be different. Things in our lives that we know God is telling us, hey, this needs to change. But things that we struggle with. We struggle with greatly because maybe we just don't know how to change them. Because maybe we just don't know how to make lasting changes with those things. Because deep down, we just don't know how to be victorious. And yeah, there's areas in our lives that we do know how to be victorious in, things that we're good at. We know how to be oftentimes victorious in the ways that God has gifted us. Like Victor, he knows how to be victorious with cars. I can't fix up cars like Victor can. Doug, he knows how to be victorious building things. He's built an entire house. I wouldn't even know where to start. Jessica knows how to be victorious in singing a song. When I sing, my voice won't do what I wish it would do. It does. Those around me hear that they wish it sounded different, right? There are areas in our lives where we will be victorious because He's just gifted us greatly. There are other areas in our lives where being victorious will be a great struggle. It'll be tough. Areas in our lives where the answer, the fix just isn't clear. Or times where we know the answer, but we just can't figure out how to make that happen. Other times where we know the answer, we take a few steps towards the answer, but then things get tough, and things get painful, and then we stop. And so last Sunday, our first week in this sermon series, Victorious, we talked a lot about all of this. We looked at the passage of Jesus meeting with the woman at the well. We looked at her life. We looked at the circumstances that were surrounding her life, the things that she was going through. And we took a deep look at how Jesus interacted with her, the specific words that He spoke to her. And we determined, what we walked away from that sermon with this determination is that in every situation in our lives, Jesus is the answer. He is the answer. He's the one who brings hope. He's the one who brings clarity. He's the one who gives us what we need to be victorious. He's the one. But we also talked about how even though He brings all of those things to us, in that relationship with Him, we always have a choice. It comes down to us. Are we willing to say, for the things that we wish were different, that Jesus not only is the answer, but that Jesus is enough? Because very often the thing that we want to be different, the thing that we want to change, isn't what is at the root of it all. Isn't it as what is at the root of the issue? For the woman at the well, when Jesus told her that one of the things He could do for her is to give her living water that would cause her to never be thirsty again, her mind immediately went to the thought that I'll never have to come back and actually have to draw water again. This will be great. She loved the thought of that. She loved the idea, this is going to make my life so much easier. And that's what we're often after in relationship with God. Something easier. An easier life, an easier job, an easier way of life, an easier way to earn more money, an easier relationship with God. And friends, when you go to God looking for an easier way out, an easier solution, you're always going to be disappointed. And here's why. Well, Jesus isn't looking to make your life easier. He's looking to change your life. The woman at the well, her life was changed that day when Jesus moved her past her initial desire for her circumstance to be easier and brought to her real life change through him as now her Messiah. Well, then everything changed for her. Don't get so fixated on what you think would make your situation better that you miss what God desires to do in and through the situation that you're in. You see, it isn't that following Jesus isn't easy, so to speak. He told his followers, and we've talked a lot about this. He says that my yoke is easy, my burden is light. He told them that in Matthew 11, verse 30. So why then am I telling you that Jesus isn't looking to make your life easier? Because he's promised us something. In John 16:33, that in this life you will face troubles of many kinds. He's promised us that as part of life. You will have trouble. And when we think about that trouble's the opposite really of easy, right? When you go to fix something and it isn't easy, it's not going as smoothly as you'd hoped. What do you say? What do you say when your wife asks you how that's going? I've joked with some of you that the house that we bought not too long ago, it's got a pool. It's got an above-ground pool, and when we got it, the pieces and parts of it, it's all been all over the place. None of it was hooked up and ready to go, and I've never had a pool before. And I've got two little girls who are driving me nuts about getting this pool up and running and going. And each step of the way has been a problem with getting that pool going and running. And so when Denise asked me, hey, how's it going? A lot of thoughts run through my mind in that moment. The Christian way of describing it might be is, it's given me some trouble. It's given me some trouble. Trouble's the opposite of easy. And Jesus has promised us that we will have trouble in our lives. He's promised it. He's guaranteed it. That's because of sin. Sin is in this world. It goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, that original sin. And with that sin came the consequences of sin. What were those consequences? Well, they were pretty basic, really. Now we have death. With that, we have separation from God, and that we would now live in a world that's under a curse. And those three things work hand in hand together. A world that's bringing death, both through time and circumstances. Along with that, life will always be a struggle because the world is literally working against us. And the curse of Adam that's on all of mankind, our human nature, fighting against the very things of God. All things that wrap those things up together make being victorious pretty tough. It's stacked against us in our circumstances, in our situations, in what life has dealt with us. Those things that, you know what, we never even asked for. We didn't bring on ourselves. It's stacked against us. And God knows this. He knows it. And he's done some things about it. When we think about that, how awesome is that? God knows that it's stacked against us. So in his love, in his mercy, his goodness, his kindness, he's done some things about it. In fact, let's look at a passage where this is on full display. Let's read John chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. John chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. It says, from Galilee, Jesus returned to Jerusalem to observe one of the Jewish feasts. Inside the city near the sheep gate, there's a pool called in Aramaic the house of loving kindness, surrounded by 5 covered porches. Hundreds of sick people were lying under the covered porches, the paralyzed, the blind, and the crippled, all of them waiting for their healing. For an angel of God periodically descended into the pool to stir the waters, and the first one who stepped into the pool after the waters swirled would instantly be healed. Among the many sick people lying there was a man who had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, he knew that the man had been crippled for a long time. And Jesus said to him, do you truly long to be well? The sick man answered, sir, there's no way I can get healed. for I have no one to lower me into the water when the angel comes. As soon as I try to crawl to the edge of the pool, someone else jumps in ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up. Pick up your sleeping mat, and you will walk." And immediately he stood up. He was healed. So he rolled up his mat and walked again. Now Jesus worked this miracle on the Sabbath. So this passage, context, what's going on in this passage? What's going on around this passage? What's the scene here? So John's gospel, which is a similar gospel to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but at the same time it's very different from Matthew, Mark, and Luke's gospel. It's laid out in a particular way that walks us as the reader through numerically the signs of Jesus, meaning public signs that Jesus did to show that he was more than just a teacher. He was more than just a wise person. He was more than just a prophet, but that he was the Son of God, that he was the Messiah. So the first sign that's given in the book of John is when Jesus, at the wedding feast in Cana, turned the water into wine. The second sign was when he healed a royal official's son who was very sick. And in the passage here that we've just looked at is considered this third sign of Jesus. And we see at the beginning of this passage, the beginning of this chapter 4, that Jesus has traveled from Galilee, the region that was his home base, so to speak, and now he'd gone to Jerusalem, which was very much the home base of the entire Jewish religion. To put those differences from Galilee to Jerusalem religiously into context, it would be like thinking of Jerusalem, the religious leaders there, as the ones in the big leagues, the ones who had arrived, and then thinking of the region of Galilee as just a bunch of high school baseball teams, maybe even lower than that, like Little League. And so Jesus is arriving on the scene in Jerusalem, this low level, to the Jewish leaders, the religious leaders, wannabe rabbi from a small fishing community. That's how he would have been seen upon entering Jerusalem at one of the festivals or feasts here. And while he's in Jerusalem, he goes to an interesting place. The translation I read out of this morning, it listed as the house of loving kindness. If you've read this passage before, maybe your Bible described it as Bethsaida. That's how it's typically translated. And in this scene, this interesting and almost really peculiar kind of place that Jesus has gone to, the picture is then painted for us of what it looks like. There's a large pool, picture like a public pool. There's this large pool there, and surrounding it are these five types of colonnades or covered walkways. These shaded areas, in other words. And underneath these shaded areas, these covered porches that encircle the pool, were hundreds of people. Only these people weren't there to swim. These people weren't there to have fun, to enjoy the water on a beautiful day. These people were sick. More than that, they were disabled. They were invalids. It describes the people who were there in three ways. They were paralyzed, blind, crippled. In other words, this is a type of homeless camp for Jesus' time. These people who cannot work, cannot make a living because of the circumstances of their bodies. They're the beggars of this society. They're ones who would have been seen as being unclean by the religious law, that would not have been entered, even if they could get there, would not have been allowed to go into the temple, which is a very big deal in Jesus' time, especially in Jerusalem. And on top of that, there are a lot of them there. It says hundreds of people at this pool, hundreds of people in need. Different circumstances of what their needs were. Some were blind, some were paralyzed, some were crippled. Different circumstances, but all in need of the same thing. All in need and desiring healing. And as people, we all have different circumstances in our lives, different situations in our lives. We have unique things going on in our lives, but no matter our circumstances, we all need the same thing. We all need healing. We all need something to change, for something to be different, for something to be better. as people who've been born, who are part of this broken and sinful world, a world that's hopeless, we all deep down desperately need healing. It might be healing for things that have happened to us, healing some things from things that we've experienced, healing from some really bad choices that we've made for ourselves, really bad choices that maybe we've made for others, healing from relationships, healing from addictions, healing of our hearts, our minds, our spirits. No matter our situations, how different they might be one from another, we all desperately need the same thing. We all desperately need the healing of Jesus. And in our situations, in the thing that you might be here this morning and you wish you could be victorious in, you need healing from it. You know what it's doing to you. You know what it's doing to your life. You know it. You know it needs to change. You know it, but you keep going back to it. You know it, but it just seems too difficult to change. You know it, but you might not even know what to do about it. You know it, but you're overwhelmed by it. You know it, but fill in the blank. So for a second, try to picture with me the scene of our passage. Try to picture it from what Jesus saw that day as he walked through one of those archways. Picture what he saw as he made his way through this crowd of hundreds of people. It would have been a pretty tough scene. He probably smelled how bad it was before he actually saw it. Hundreds of people crowded together. People who couldn't take care of themselves. People who, for most of them, didn't have anyone else to take care of them either. A very hopeless picture. A very hopeless scene that day. And friends, it's a scene that's no different than the situation in our lives. The things that we face that need healing. Again, sin that needs to change. Sin that causes us to be blind, to be lame, to be paralyzed. Addictions that cause us to stay in one place, stay stuck in one place without hope. Anger, resentment, frustration that we might feel towards others, towards our situation that paralyzes us from experiencing joy and experiencing peace. Habits that blind us from seeing a path that would lead to experiencing God in an entirely new way. You see, I think oftentimes we come to church hoping that we might get something. Feeling like, if I go to church today, maybe I'll get something that will make this better. And what we end up doing, we get ourselves close to the answer, but we just can't seem to get it fully. And this man, the disabled man from our passage, he was close to the answer. Because in verse 4, we're told that an angel would come down periodically, would stir up the waters, and that whoever got to the water first, whoever got in there, instantly got healed. Which can lead to a lot of questions about what was happening here. How could it happen? A lot of supernatural stuff going on here that can be tough to make some sense out of. But instead of focusing on all of that, how that worked, think about what it would have meant for this man. It would have meant that for this man, over and over and over again, he saw other people get healed. Over and over and over again, he saw other people get what he desperately wanted. To the point where, what is the point, right? What does it matter anymore? God seems to be blessing others, everyone else but me. God seems to be healing everyone but me. God seems to be changing things for everyone else but me. Has your situation brought you to the place where you have thought that? Has it brought you to the place where you feel that? Has it brought you to the place where you believe that? If it has, I have good news for you. It doesn't mean if you feel that or you've asked that or said those things, it doesn't mean that you've turned your back on God. It also doesn't mean that God has turned his back on you. Here's what it does mean. God's timing is perfect. In our imperfect situations, God's timing will always be perfect. For the woman at the well, an imperfect situation. A woman who had been married a bunch of times, was living with the guy she was currently with, was the outcast of the community, which meant she had to go draw water at a totally different time than all the other ladies in the heat of the day, all alone, to avoid the people who judged her. She, in her situation, in the middle of her imperfect situation, was met by Jesus with his perfect timing. God's timing is always perfect. Which got a few amens. That's good. It's a spiritual truth. But it also comes with a great warning. Because God's timing is not our timing. The Bible, all throughout it, it tells us this. His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. His understanding, not our understanding. His timing is not your timing. Is not my timing. And God's timing can be very hard for us not only to understand, but to just deal with times. Look at verse 5 and the last part of verse 6 with me again. Among the many sick people lying there was a man who had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, he knew that the man had been crippled for a long time. We know there are a lot of sick people there. We know that from time to time, there was an answer for their sickness. God would stir the waters for the first person in, they would instantly get healed. We also know that that would mean that there were a lot of people there who did not get healed. And then we learn that for this particular man, he had been in his situation, in his disabled condition for 38 years. 38 years. That's a long time. That's a long time. It's a really long time in Jesus' times. Things in general were not easy back then for people, but they really weren't easy for the disabled. Now, it doesn't say one way or the other if he'd been at the pool for 38 years. But the passage does tell us that when Jesus saw him, he knew he'd been crippled for a long time. Which means most likely this man had been at this pool for a long time. And if we tie that together with the end of verse 3, we get a pretty clear picture of what this man's life was like. Because the end of verse 3 says, all of them, everyone there was waiting for their healing. 38 years of being crippled, 38 years of being a beggar, 38 years of not having a purpose, not having a real meaning in his life. Years and years and years of waiting. Waiting for things to be different, waiting for something new, waiting for his prayers to be answered. Waiting and waiting and waiting. And friends, I think we know this. Waiting is one of the most difficult things that we have to do. Waiting. What happens when we have to wait? Oftentimes we grow impatient. Oftentimes we take matters into our own hands. Oftentimes when we're supposed to be waiting, we act out of our impatience, and then we run into messing things up. There are times in life when God will tell you to wait. There are times when the direct answer to your prayer in that moment is to wait. When you pray for your relationship to change, a relationship to be restored, God might be telling you that the answer for you right now is to wait. Because there's some work that he has to do. Some work that he has to do in their lives. Some work that he has to do in your life first. And when he tells us it's time to wait, and that's the answer for right now, what we're asking him, will you wait with God? Will you wait with him? Can I tell you something? Most people won't. Most won't. Most people will not wait on God and will not wait with him. It's too difficult. It takes too long. Will you wait with God? For this man, he'd waited a really long time, nearly 40 years. God's timing is not easy, but it's the best. God's timing, when we're going through it and we're waiting, it can seem painful. But God's timing is the best. God's timing won't always make sense in the moment, in the waiting, but his timing is the best. Because in whatever your situation is that you want to be different, that you've been praying about, that you've been waiting on, the time will come when God will act. Jesus, the time came when, for that man, Jesus walked through the archways that day, and he showed up in this man's life, and he's going to show up in your situation too. Because with Jesus, there is always hope. With Jesus, there's always the promise that he will not abandon you, that he will not forsake you, that he will not leave you in your time of need. With Jesus, there is always hope. I know it in my life, not only because God's word says that it's true, but I've seen it, I've experienced it, I've lived it. That time of waiting for it, it can be difficult, it can be tough, it can seem to take forever. But there will come a time when Jesus will show up. And he'll ask you when he does. He'll ask you the same question that he asked this disabled man that day at the end of verse 6. Do you truly long to be well? Do you truly long to be well? You've waited. Maybe you've waited with God. And now he's here and he's asking you that same question. Do you truly long to be well? Do you truly long for this to be different? Do you truly long for this to change? You've been praying for it. Maybe you've begged God over and over and over again for it to be different. And now he's showing up in your life and he's asking you if you truly long for it to be different. He asked the disabled man that day. And verse 7 gives us his response to that question. It says, the sick man answered, Sir, there's no way I can get healed. For I have no one to lower me into the water when the angel comes. As soon as I try to crawl to the edge of the pool, someone else jumps in ahead of me. Friends, so often when God shows up in our lives, ready to move, ready to change, he's been working on them, he's been working on us, he's been working on the situation, he's ready to bring something new. What we end up doing is responding the same way that the sick man did with Jesus by saying, there's no way. There's no way. When Jesus is ready to do a miracle in our lives, ready to do a miracle in our situations, we go to God and say, there's no way. There's no way it can happen. Why do we do that? Why do we do this? Why is that our response? Why did the sick man do it? Because in order for God to bring victory to our situations, he needs to do it in a way that will stretch us. He needs to do it in a way that will stretch you. He needs to do it in a way that won't make a lot of sense. And we don't usually know what to do with that, do we? When God starts working in our lives and he starts asking some things of us, he starts asking us to change, asking us to do something that will take us out of our comfort zones. We say, there's no way. I can't do that. I can do this thing, but I can't do that. I can do this thing, but I will not do that. Because we have ideas of how we think God should work. Ideas of how we sometimes think God has to work. For this disabled man that day, he believed the only way he could be healed was to get to that pool, to be the first one in the pool when the waters were stirred. And when Jesus asked him if he was ready to be healed, ready for his life to be different, ready for things to actually change, he told Jesus there was no way that could happen. Why? Because he believed more in his limitations than he believed in a limitless God. He believed more in his situation than he believed in God. He believed more in the obstacles that were in front of him than he believed in the power of God. You see, what he had done over that time that he'd been there at the pool, he determined there's only one answer to his situation. He determined, based on what he'd seen, based on what he'd heard, that there was only one way his life could be made better. Sure, he wanted to be healed, but in his mind, there was no way that could actually happen. And you might be here this morning believing the exact same thing. You know in your situation you need healing, but. You know your situation needs to change, but. You know the addiction needs to stop, but. Friends, if you long for things to be different, you have to long for more and more of a limitless God. Because he'll show up in your life ready to do the impossible. And the way he'll want to do the impossible will bring you to a place where you'll have to decide if you'll place your faith in him or not. Because the reason that this man gave to Jesus that he couldn't get healed, Jesus didn't listen to that reason at all. He didn't have to. He didn't see that as an impossible situation at all. And that's because Jesus, he's the one who's spoken the words to his believers, to his followers, to his disciples, that yes, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Do you believe that? Do you believe that truly all things are possible with God? Because what he's not telling you to do, he's not telling you to look around and see what he's done for others. He's not telling you to look around to determine that your situation can't change because you don't have this, you don't have that, you can't do this. The other person will have to change first. The other person will have to apologize first. The addiction is just part of the way that I am. He's not telling you any of those things. And if those words are familiar to you, when God shows up and you start saying, I can't do it because, and you've been listening to the wrong side. You've been hearing the lies of the enemy. Because Jesus' words for you today are the exact same that they were for the disabled man. Today, he's not telling you to fixate on all the things that have been holding you back. He's not telling you to fixate on your situation, how bad it is, how impossible it all seems. Instead, he's telling you what he told that man that day. He says, stand up. Pick up your sleeping mat and you will walk. Stand up. He's saying, forget about the pool and how you can't get there. Stand up. Forget about all those times before where you tried to crawl to the pool only to get to the edge and see someone else get there before you. Forget about that. Stand up. Forget all the times you got so close to the breakthrough, but missed it. Stand up. Folks, that's a challenge for us today. Stand up and be victorious with Jesus. Friends, if you literally would stand up with me in our time of response, in our altar call time, it's time to stand up and be victorious. Victorious in the situations, victorious when it makes no sense, the solution that Jesus is bringing to us. It's time to hand those things over and say, God, my faith in you is stronger than what I've seen, what I've heard, what I've believed. I believe, God, that you are the God who can do impossible things that, yes, for me, with man, it is impossible. But with you, Father, nothing is impossible. For you in your situation, it is not impossible. What he might be telling you to do for that miracle, Jessica talked about the miracle before we sang that song. It might just be a small little thing that if you just take one step, that it could change everything. One step in your relationship with him, one step in believing in him, having a stronger measure, deeper measure of faith could change everything. Father, this morning, in this response time, I pray that just as you stirred those waters all those years ago and people got to experience you healing in a new way, that you would stir something through your Spirit in our hearts today. That you would stir us, that you would move us to take that next step. That we would stand up. That we would hear the words of Jesus saying, get up, take your mat, go, walk. I know you haven't walked in 38 years. Stand up. I know you think there's only one way for this to be fixed. Stand up. I'm telling you something new. I'm bringing something new into your life, and it's me. I've showed up, and it's time for you to stand up. Friends, if there's anything that you need prayer about, know that over these next few moments that the altar is open for prayer. Just don't miss what God has for you in this moment, what he's asking of you.